Næss is a writer and a playwright that already has produced an impressive body of work consisting of poetry, novels, and plays. In all her work, you can sense a strong longing for other aesthetics and forms, new metaphors with a restless, poetic approach to the world. At the moment, she's doing artistic research as a PhD here at the Academy of Theatre. In her PhD presentation, she writes that what initiated her research is something that she calls ethical tension. She writes the following: "Although I am free to act, I feel stuck and locked in a situation that stem from deep political and economic dilemmas. I'm free to change, but afraid to make these changes happen. I might hate the system I live in, but I see no alternative," she writes. Næss then tries to find other means and methods for creating drama. It can be by exchanging the character with a place, by searching for metaphors or allegories that makes the situation somehow new to us, or it can simply be writing with other playwrights in order to make a common ground for text production. This and more we're going to talk about in the next 40 minutes. Welcome, Næss. I forgot to mention Tale's last publication is 3 radio plays. Is that what we call it in English? 3 radio plays in transit. Yeah? Yeah. You should read it.
Do.
You can probably also hear it on NRK still, or?
I think the last one, Fun, is still there.
Yeah?
Yeah. But if you Google it, you'll find several works for voice or for the audio media online. So please do.
Cool. When I read this PhD description that I quoted from, I have the feeling that the artist somehow always is producing ideology all the time. That's kind of a possible conclusion of what you're writing. But that we are not forcingly aware of this ideological production. Is that somehow how you see it?
Well, I see that there is an ideological production going on all around us all the time, also in the arts. So, but I wouldn't say that art necessarily producing it, but at least it echoes it, or mirrors it, or uses it in some way, utilizes it, but not necessarily being aware of doing so. But what I'm very sure of is that the text always produces not necessarily ideology, but at least aesthetics and ethics that stem from ideology, and always is, in that respect, in a dialogue with ideology. I don't think text is ever neutral. Even when it tries to be neutral, it sort of mirrors what we see as neutral, which is already, a fabric of our ideology. We just don't see it as that because it's what we surround us with. So we see it as every day, but it's actually a part of the fabric of our society, which is based on how we see the world.
So, what is your definition of ethics then? Is it precisely that, how we see the world?
Well, we went to, Kyo does a lot of interesting seminars and stuff for us to do PhDs here, or artistic PhDs. And one was about ethics and the rights of works of art. And we had a very interesting discussion about the difference between morale and ethics. Is it the same? And for me, those things are very, very different. For me, ethics is something that derives from an action or a thought. It's something you actually have to ponder upon. It's based on some kind of judgment, not on being judged. While the morale is sort of outside you and judges you. You can be a part of the morale, but the ethics is a part of your your inner way of being in the world and interacting with it.
Expectations?
Well, also, I mean, choices. What do I base my choices on? What are my ethics? What is the idea behind what I do? Why do I act the way I am? So it's very, very, very connected to the actor's work when they work in a performance, or us when we write plays. It's just that we don't talk so much about it in text production. So every choice you do as a playwright implies some kind of ethics. Some kind of, is this a good way to see it if I have this kind of way of viewing the world? If I see a person or a human being as this kind of species or this kind of way of behaving in the world, what kind of choices do I make according to those ethics? Yeah, did that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
and actually, in a way, you can argue that every choice of an actor or a playwright is based on also ethical ideas or systems,
Yes.
more or less conscious.
Yeah. And some of these ethics we produce, I think, it's our own ethics in the way we produce them, and some belongs to the ethics of the group or society. But morale is something else. It's more to do with rules and judgment.
That's a dogma.
In a way, it's a part of what the philosophers call doxa.
Yes.
Yes, what's just there, what we take for granted. You know, you don't do this, but you do this. And that's changed, that's historical based and changes from society and historical periods and so on.
So is it then correct to say that your PhD somehow then tries to kind of find out how can we be aware and change the ethics or the thinking of ethics and morality in playwrights?
Actually, I think it's more like a demasking. I'm trying to take the mask off myself and my texts to understand to understand my own ethics and how they rule the text. And how sometimes I write a text which actually is a very good text, but it doesn't imply the ethics that I want it to have.
So you want to reveal your own ethics?
I want to reveal my own ethics and the relationship it has to do with my text production.
Okay.
Yeah. And since this topic of mine is this feeling that I, as a human being in the world, really want something else than what I have. You know, I go and buy a t-shirt and a cup of coffee, and the coffee is more expensive than the t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Or I buy a piece of cheese and a dress, and the cheese is more expensive than the dress. And in some way I know that I'm eating not only my culture, but the economy that produces that culture. And it makes me feel sick sometimes. I feel like I'm on the top of the rubbish heap, yeah? With a crown on my head, not able to get down from it. But I don't feel, there's this tension, but I don't know, because I don't know what to do about it. Although I know that I'm in a democracy where I can change things, I haven't the clue how to do it and what to ask for instead. So my ethics is kind of in a crisis.
It sounds very exhausting.
Well, it's this every day. Maybe I'm the only one having it like that, but I don't think so. I think I can see it in a lot of places anyway around us, this kind of ethical tension. Maybe it has something to do with the crisis that came up in a discussion yesterday.
So how can we see this link between ethics and politics, I assume, also, and ideology? Can we then start to talk about aesthetics always as political, ethical, moral? Is that an interesting approach?
Well, it might not be for everybody, but for me it is. Because theatre has to do with our relationship with the world in some way or other. Even when I write my most minimal, introvert, personal, existential monologues, there is something there that relates to the world, and it always pops up. It's like we're haunted by it. Theatre in some way is social or dialogical because it is about human beings and we are always in a context. Even when we try, even those philosophers sit on those poles, on those platforms on top of the poles and never talk to people, they're still a part of public life. They still do something to us. There's still communication. There's still an address. There's still a way of saying, I'm here. Disappearance is not really an option for a human being.
I met one in Berlin last year, actually.
Who did that?
Pole. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, like they did in the ancient Greek
I
time.
know.
Yeah. There were philosophers on the top of the columns,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And even in biblical times they did that. You see them and you find them in the Bible as well. Yeah. And Monty
Fantastic.
Python, of course.
Yes. of
There's
course.
one in Life of Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's great. It's another term that I think we should maybe throw into this discussion somehow, which has been very important in the field of theater for the last at least 20 years, is the term post-dramatic theater, which is a way of talking about theater and drama like somehow the drama stopped and it started to be post-dramatic. That's an assumption from the 90s. And Hans Thies Lehmann is the first one coining this term. Maybe this has something with all this discussion to do. I don't know. How would you describe what post-dramatic theater is? So
Well,
we just have mentioned the term here.
I really have to say I'm not an expert on Hans Thies Lehmann. I'm still sort of going back and forth in this book. But if someone wants to become an expert, this is the book that everybody's been reading for the last 30 years. Hans Thies Lehmann's Post-Dramatic Theater, or Das Postdramatisches Theater, which was the original title in German. But in a way, it's got some of the same kind of mission as Paul Castagno has, because it tries to sum up or look at or understand a field of theater that happened in relation. Let's put it simpler. He tries to find a way of understanding new text as a group phenomenon. So it's like Paul said yesterday, it's like a span of text. It's not like one type of text, but he's looking at all these new types of text forms after Artaud and Grotowski, which are two like pioneers in expressive modern theatre. But his starting point is in the 60s, while Paul's is in the late 80s and 90s, so that's a difference, of course. And his starting point has very much to do with when late modernism turns to performance-based art, which happened simultaneously both in visual arts and in theatre. So visual arts and theatre merges in this performance art, which takes away or puts the focus back on to the performance as an act and in relation to the audience. So while Paul's starting point is the playwrights themselves. So what Hans Thies Lehmann is trying to see is what happens outside the text-based theatre in the big theatres from 1700 to 1960, maybe.
He's maybe not even so occupied by text.
Well, I mean, this is what he's saying. He's saying that in a way, and that's a major. So there's one big difference is that they're starting at different time points. Their focus is on while Paul's focus is on the playwrights, Hans Thies Lehmann's focus is on theatre in general, I would say. And then the last one is that Hans Thies Lehmann's way of looking at theatre is a reaction to what he calls drama. That's why he calls it post. So he's saying there's a break or something reacting to, something in opposition to, or something that's talking to drama or something else. And in that there's also our reaction to the text. So a lot of his theories are also about how theatre is not text, or how the text is just another building block in the hierarchy of theatre.
Text shouldn't be in the top of the hierarchy.
No, he's trying to say, look, let's look at the hierarchy. Why is it like that? And that a lot of these praxis, that it's very practical, this book. It's a lot about examples and different praxis. That text is not anything more important or less important than everything else that goes on. But it's also a refocus on the audience and as theatre as an object that you can play around with, instead of a lived-through storytelling machinery, like Paul talked about yesterday. While Paul Castagno looks at, the way I understand it, is that Paul Castagno doesn't look at these new playwriting strategies as a reaction to the drama. He looks at it as something that lives beside of it, of its own accord. It's not a reaction to, but it's a production in dialogue with, and who ravagely, bastardly, and unashamed, just picks from whatever it wants. So it doesn't have to avoid these strategies of the traditional drama. It can even live inside it, like a hybrid, but also like these cannibalistic plants who live from other plants. So in a way, Paul's theory is much more forward-looking, I would say. It's looking on the potential of what we can do with language in theatre, while Thies Lehmann looks at what we haven't been able to do and what is the reaction to that.
A lot of the examples that Hans Thies Lehmann bring up as post-dramatic is also like typical devised plays.
Yes.
It's theater groups that create their own text by improvisation and so on. So it's kind of the playwright is just kind of disappearing sometimes. Is that something which is happening as a consequence of this post-dramatic shift that the playwright is kind of?
Well, I wouldn't be a prophet and talk about how it is internationally. I think Paul can probably say more about that in an American context. But I can say something about how it's been in Norway. In Norway, we have had, which has to do with politics and ethics, actually. We have had a kind of shift, an internationalization of the theatre, and also a professionalization of the theatre. Christian Seltun, who's been a leader of Black Box and of Trøndelag Teater, said it very wisely. He said that there's been a big change in Norwegian theatre from the 1980s. And a lot has to do with the post-dramatic strategies of international groups coming into the programming scenes like Black Box and Avant-Garden and Teatergarasjen in Bergen and so on. But at the major theatres, drama has still been of the essence, you know. So there has been slowly a kind of interchange between that. But what happens is that these playwrights who use the new playwriting strategies sort of falls between two chairs. Because they're not a part of they're not really that central for the post-dramatic theatre. The playwright is more like on the side. And the playwright, since the houses produces drama, and the playwrights maybe are not so interested in that, they're more interested in other new forms. There's kind of a gap between the two big vehicles of theatre in Norway. But I think it's changing, and like Paul Castaño says in his book, I think it's the playwrights who are changing it, which is great fun. I think the playwrights are doing the most exciting and interesting work at the moment.
Since we are on an acting festival, where does this leaves the actor?
Oh, this is
what are the new challenges of this post-dramatic or new playwriting strategies and all these kind of things? How should the actor be aware of it?
The actor should be overjoyed, I think. Really, really excited about this. Like Paul Castaño, if you read just the first two chapters, the foreword in the first two chapters of his book, he says there's been a shift in American theatre in that period from like mid-80s until now, where before the text was like a vehicle for the situations, the characters, and the directing, you know, the contextualization or the interpretation. It's been a time of interpretation, I think. For a long time, interpretation has been more focused than production or creating. So the directors interpret. It doesn't mean that is not creative or producing real, unique pieces of art, but it's also an interpretive thing to do, to direct. But the actual creating has been sort of put a bit to the side. And since theatre, in a way, has been there to feed the machine, the theatre-making machine, through situations, through actions, that then the directors and the actors can utilize. In a way, it sort of left them a bit without an own initiative. And also, in a way, the theatrical, or what Aristotle calls spectacle, you know, the real theatrical stuff, the stuff that I fell in love with when I saw Bergman's Magic Flute when I was 8, you know, with big sceneries coming in and out, and gods coming down from the sky, and the earth cracking up, and fire produced by dancers with shaved heads, and dragons, and all this. Theatrics, spectacle, has because sort of come in the background for producing stories about truth and life and deep meaning. And I don't think that there's something wrong with that. It's just that these new strategies takes back the theatrics and also back the skill-based things, like the virtuoso monologue, for instance, or the idea of opening the text for improvisation for the actor.
So somehow I sense that you are describing an area of possibilities of more theatrical language, theatrical styles of the actor, more theatricality.
That's the way I see it. I see it for a great potential for the actor to use much more of the theatrical devices he or she has in her or his toolbox.
And I guess we talk about all levels, the way you use your voice, the way you use your body, the way you're kind of using the stage, whatever.
Imagine like the potential there is just in the use of voice. I'm really interested in the expressiveness and the theatricality of the voice. We don't utilize that half as much as we could. And what a great instrument it is for an actor. And also physicality, like combining different styles like Paul talked about yesterday, like practices from kabuki and realist dialogue. I mean, it's a real challenge, but it's really a way of exploring your craft. And the actor then becomes actually the producer of the aesthetics and ethics of the play, because there's space in the play for the actor to not only be a vehicle for the text or the direction, but to actually produce parts of the play and be the dramaturg for the play himself or herself. And also, of course, there's this new way of collaboration. I think the main thing that this new playwriting strategy does is that they put the playwright out of the back room and into the heart of the theater-making machine together with the actor. So we're making theater together as a community, not like experts on different sides.
We have had the parts of history. The writer of the play has been closer to the theater than maybe since 1850. So it's maybe important to mention that Shakespeare really was an actor and worked on stage.
Yeah, and like I think that as Paul also mentions here, like Parks and several other American playwrights, and also we have Lollike, for instance, here, or Kristin Eiriksdottir. It's very central Scandinavian writers who should really enjoy reading. They often work collaborative with other writers, but also with actors, and I do the same. I mean, half of my work is either with other writers or with actors, and we create things together. And a lot of it is producing tools then to make the actor and the playwright utilize the potential of creating a piece where we are not equals, but we can use each other's strong points and crafts.
One part of what you're talking about here is also seems to be opposing to or searching for other ways to be theatrical.
Yes.
Which sometimes can mean that a plot or character doesn't seem like the founding element on the stage. And you, for instance, have worked with a place as a starting point, which I think you also do in the workshop.
Oh, we work with plays as well. We just had one day, so we'll see.
Yeah.
We created 12 different settings or universes of places yesterday. So it's very exciting, yeah.
Cool. But when you instead of like having a plot structures or a character's conflict or something, but instead choose a place as the kind of basis of something, how can you do that without becoming static? I mean, how do you move forward in one or another sense in the play?
But it's interesting, isn't it, that we have this idea of everything that's not a character, a static, while we all the time we are living in a world where we are influenced by very, very active elements that are not human all the time. And I think this is probably the biggest shift that we are realizing this. There was this big shift, of course, when we went from feudalism to this bourgeoisie society that we have now, where we all have human rights and finally women can vote. And there's been a long process of turning us from a mass being under God and the king, and then everybody else is under there, to being individual, unique, free human beings with our own human rights. A huge shift. And now I think we're starting to realize that we're not alone. It's not like before it was God and King and then human beings. Now it's like human beings and then everything else. And now we're realizing that probably without the planktons, for instance, that we wouldn't be here. So there's a new discovery of matter and of other species as a part of the route for our survival. And actually, there's a fantastic metaphor in the eco-philosopher Michel Serres' last book, Time of Crisis, where he says there's a painting of Goya. And we usually see the world like in dichotomies, right? So it's the rich and the poor, the female and the male. Opposites, yeah, black and white. And there's a fight between these, yeah? This is how we see the world. There's a fight between the rich and the poor. And I think this is true in a way. It's a good analysis of the world. And usually the rich and the strong win over the poor and the, and the weak, right? And the big job has been to make society equal, is to make, give tools for the weak and the poor to fight the rich. I guess we're losing that battle right now, but still there has been a job for the welfare state. So. But in this Goya image, there's this huge, gigantic, godlike figure fighting this little figure, and it seems like it's obvious, although we cheer for the little figure, that the big figure is going to win. It's just one problem. They're fighting in quicksand. So the quicksand is definitely going to win. So we're not in a dichotomy anymore. We are in, all of a sudden, we're having this potential dialogue with the rest of the, excuse my language, fucking universe. And it has to do something with our playwriting. So we have to take the place as a dancing partner. Because the place is where we live. We create the place, but the place creates us. So that's why the place interests me. And the other side of it is that, of course, a setting like Oslo, or if you live in Oslo and Tromsø or in Detroit that I visited last year, there's something there that is common for us all. And there's something there that unifies us. There's a tension between the place and the people, but there's also something in the place that binds us together, that gives us common experiences. And I think for me right now, it's really important to remind myself that I'm not alone. I don't have to do this on my own. There's other people here with similar experiences like me because we come from the same place. So there's two sides to it. Did that make any sense?
I think so. I'm associating wildly and thinking of new, like, there are a lot of different philosophical movements right now, like new materialism and so on, which kind of state that a stone is maybe as valuable as a human. We should, and that we should discuss that possibility.
Or that at least we are, when you look at things in process, I mean, sooner or later we're all going to be something pretty similar to stone.
Yeah.
So there is not like they're very different to us, because when we're dead, we just matter, all of us. So having that understanding of things being in the process from matter to life, to life to matter,
Or the quite recent discovery of that trees worldwide wood, is that what they call it? Like the trees are, the roots of the trees are giving information to an extreme extent.
They're talking to each other.
Yeah, over huge distances. Which makes us aware of the world or the nature or the functioning of the system in another way. Which obviously, if we're going to take that in, we need to, and if we're going to try to talk about it in art, we have to try to find some other means or entrances.
If that's what you want, like for instance for me, if that's what I'm interested in, it has to have consequences for my art, I think, Otherwise I would just, but I mean, I could just go on producing art that doesn't, I could write art that traps me, so that when people read it, think that I'm not interested in that. I mean, that's a big job. That's what I'm working with all the time, and that's why Palka Sander's book is important, because it gives me tools to break out of the forms that usually trap you, so you write the same piece again and again. So you are changing, but your art is stagnating and leaving you behind. And I think artists are different there. Some have more need. For me personally, art is about understanding something. And I don't necessarily write to tell everybody else what I've understood. I write to understand it myself and hope that that will be in dialogue, that will be polyvocal enough for it to produce some kind of understanding back to me in the audience, or that kind of discussion with the material that I'm trying to explore will continue outside of me afterwards.
So in a way, it sounds for me, it's not so much about opposing to what has been or being against Aristoteles or something, as to we have to find a way to talk about how we perceive the world today, what we have found out, how we deal with the world.
Oh yeah,
Is there something you have sometimes talked about? We maybe not post, we are pre. Is it connected with this?
Well, first I have to say that Aristotle's idea of catharsis, for instance, is very central to me. I think that art has that potential, and he's pointed that out. But he's only pointed it out from a perspective that we've seen afterwards as narrative, right? But actually, the big theatrical events at his time were more ritual, or the audience was just as important as what happened on stage. It's just that we just have the text. It's really interesting, this guy called Anders Paulin, who's also been teaching here. He talked about those first, they've been portrayed as the first self-portraits in the world. It's this, on the caves, we find them in Latin America, Africa, and the United States, or on that continent. And it's this, people have put their hand on the wall, and then have sprayed color around. The first mining in the world was ochre color for this purpose of making these paintings. And people are looked upon the handprints left as the first self-portraits. And then Anders Paulin, but maybe they're not. Maybe they are actually part of a ritual that we do not have access to. Maybe the real image or the real happening was the humans being trying to connect with the mountain. So, did that make any sense?
Yes, it did. Very interesting. Just another thing we should maybe say a couple of words about. Since
but just something to do last with the pre, because I didn't answer that.
Yeah.
So having understood that the object, because that's another thing of it, that is not necessarily text that is the essence, it's what happens between us when we read or work or explore the text.
So you say that somehow what drama or theater should do is to make us be in touch with each other, be in dialogue? Is that?
It's one of those art forms that can do that, because we're all in the same room, right? So doing that, what Paul suggests and what I'm interested in is, is it possible to start to think about ourselves not as late in the world, but at the beginning? That there's a history and there's a past, but there is a beginning, and it's beginning right now, and that includes some kind of very active listening. So I guess what I really like with Paul's book is that it's all about listening to what's actually happening. It's not about projecting your meaning into it, or trying to say, this is the best way of doing it, or saying this is a reaction to what was before, or it's a rebellion against the hierarchy. It's just intently listening to find out what's actually happening here and now, and think about what might come after that. Give us tools to look forward. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I just have to ask this question as well, because you're doing a workshop where you also are going to write together, which is also connected to this EU collective play thing that you have been introduced to. This thing, writing, that you make plays together, is this a part of it? Because also I'm just thinking also that writing together doesn't forcingly make a play polyvocal. We know that most of the Hollywood movies during history has been created by groups of people. It doesn't forcingly mean that they are very polyvocal.
No.
So how can you say something about the collaborative process of doing things together, and why should we, and how?
But actually, one of the reasons for doing it is just that more people think better than one. So that's why they've done it like that in the movies. If you're going to make a long stretch of things that actually have high quality all the way along, then it's good to be more than one person. So, but as you say, it doesn't necessarily make it polyvocal. And the play we're going to read here on Friday, which is the result of our work here at KIO, had as a purpose to be polyvocal. And it was a real struggle. And we actually almost fell out. I was almost about to say, look, that's fine. You write, because I was the head writer and the dramaturg. You do that. You choose that strategy. Then I just got to say, the project is no longer the project it was. It's no longer that child, it's that child. Because if you start plotting, everybody then has to agree that this is the plot, right? If you start, and then all of a sudden you all, instead of having this possibility of having different writing styles and worlds and aesthetics and ethics in the same world, all of a sudden you have to narrow yourself into this kind of V shape. And the other thing is that, if, for instance, if you choose one character to dominate the whole play, the character then becomes the ethics of the play, because you see the rest of the play through that character's viewpoint. So you have to, in some way, both, it's like a leading character, a strong character, it's like a wild horse. You really have to control it. They usually, in my experience, especially with writing, because that's how I used to thinking, they're usually white, they're usually male, they're usually highly educated in their 40s, these characters, and they tend to take over the play. It's like a cancer. They do the most, they do the wildest acts, they do the craziest things, they want more from the others, and then all of a sudden, what they're doing is also giving a view of the world of that being the way. That's the way we human beings are. So due to that, I had to and we also had an aesthetics, but I can just tell this, if this character, like it is in our production, is an artist, a male artist, who is in the avant-garde side of the arts, right? Then also, and if we're going to use some of his ploys, some of his techniques in the production, all of a sudden we're also leaving out all the other sides. So that also dominates all the other aesthetics there, and all the other art forms. So we had to really be on our toes, because the job is to keep the different elements, writing styles and techniques of the writers open to see. So it is, when you see it, you will see it as a real hybrid.
But there's still the male in the 40s there.
There's still this male in the 40s. And actually, we had, when we did a reading, I mean, Øystein was one of the ones who noticed it immediately. Where are the girls? There were two strong girls in that team, but the two female characters
It's
were
interesting.
very weak.
It's very the reading of this play is going to take place on tomorrow?
Friday at 7.
Friday. No.
Yeah,
Friday at 7.
But the good thing was that we had these discussions, and that's another technique I often use, which I think is really interesting, because I think writing plays is also a way of thinking, is that we had these discussions, for instance, about these things, and these discussions ended up in the play as dialogue.
Cool.
So it wasn't just the characters talking, there was also us as writers ending up as dialogue in the play.
Talking about dialogue, we really should open for the audience now.
Yes, please.
If somebody has any comments or questions for
I'll
Tale
put
or
on my
something,
glasses.
just get on. And yeah, come in and sit, Gian Maria. Welcome. Somebody that have some thoughts or questions or arguments or anything? I'm looking at you. Yes.
I'm trying to understand what you speak about when you speak about ethics. Is it so that you have a political, ethical project that is more important than the art itself? Especially when you said that you had written something that you found good, but then you looked over it and saw that it didn't represent your ethics, so that you wouldn't go on with that work?
That's an interesting question.
It's a very good question. No, I think I don't think that the art is more important than ethics. I think the art is the ethics. I think those are the same. But
you're suggesting that production of art is production of ethics?
I would say that production of art, or a piece of a work of art, or a production, a version of an artwork, like we often do in theatre and interpretation, always has an ethical side to it, or is in its essence. That aesthetics is ethics. That's what Wittgenstein says. It's really nice to have his support in this. What I discover is that sometimes I don't have
I go to the aesthetics or the way of writing, the style or the way of structuring a story that I know, and I discover that with it comes a way of seeing the world that is not really mine, and that's fine. But in this particular project, I've given myself the job to demask my own ethics and strive to see what happens. What kind of writing do I have to do if I want it to be where I want my ethics to be? So it's a dialogue between the artwork and myself, discussion and trial and errors.
So then it's not, am I right if I get the feeling it's not the sort of the theme of the play, the moral or ethics theme, but it's more how you write, and does it has to do with who is, like you said now in the end, the male character, and of course we have all been presented for that when we grew up. That was all of our stories, so it's very common, I think, for us to see the story that way, or write that way ourselves. Is it like the way you write, or is it theme, or?
Well, of course, these are all the questions I ask myself. Okay. Why do I choose this theme? Is it the right theme? Should I do something else? If I choose this theme, who can I have as my characters? Or often what I do is I try to write on the theme and then let the character come out of that language, which is a very different, is what Paul said yesterday. I try to make the language create the character, or the theme that produces. Let's say, okay, you have a theme or a setting or something you want to explore. Then you produce language from that. Dialogue, monologues, bits and pieces, or even collect material, then the character sort of comes out of that language. So it's formed by it. So it's a kind of upside down way of thinking about theatre. Because I think of language as in itself as theatrical. And a very big part of it, which is probably going to talk with Paul about later, is transformation. So it means that it's not, I know that it's not completely, it doesn't have to be, if I start like this, it can change. It can become something else. So if, for instance, my way of seeing, I have as a theme, one of my themes is I want to show the world as a process, not as a battle, yeah? As a process of combined different obstacles, juxtapositional events that happens in the world that collide and creates a process, not like causality. First happens this, and then we do this, yeah? Then how do I show this process?
So do you have an example of some time where you like watch something you wrote and were like, oh yes, now this is my ethics and I love this part? Is it like, yeah. How do you know that when you have succeeded in this project?
Oh God, how do we know? It's just a feeling. And then often when you then show it to somebody else, you might discuss it, and then they might say to you, well, I don't read it like that. And then you might have to go back and revise it because you weren't there. You were blind. You were blinded by your own enthusiasm. But the worst process is when you've written something really beautiful and you know it's all there and you failed because it's still the main character doing its things, doing these causal events. It's still showing the world as a place that is cause and effect. And then you just have to say, okay, let's try again. Like they say, once more with feeling.
But I wouldn't say that you're a writer that kind of have just left the character.
Oh, no.
There are still characters in your play. There are still
Tons
events.
of
There are
characters.
still things happening.
But the difference is I don't create the character and then the world. I create the world and then the character comes out of that world. It lives in that world. It bathes in that world.
Something about the hierarchy, maybe, or yeah.
Actually,
But I want to open up for more audiences.
Go ahead.
Somebody? Yes, John.
Something about cause and effect.
Yeah.
I think that actually, to a certain extent, even in polyvocal plays, cause and effect construction can coexist with sublimation. And this is also a way to show the complexity of the universe. I think what is interesting about Paul's work is that and I think this is very innovative, is that it's in a way it is a non-ideological work. I think what it shows is that there is a spectrum which can be called playwriting, and the two extreme sides of the spectrum are what we call dramatic writing and post-dramatic theatre, and whatever is in the middle can be described as polyvocal. And I think what is also good, of course, is that the approach is much more creative and it's very practical. Everybody with some playwriting experience knows that if you try to write a 3-act structure with turning points like, just following a manual instruction, the work will come out shit, of course. It will be just terrible. And you don't work like that. I mean, it's the 3-act structure is at its best an instrument to make diagnosis on your play, certainly not to create a play.
But what about us that actually liked Jurassic Park?
Well, Jurassic Park is a wonderful example of a wonderfully applied 3-act structure, but I'm sure that when Steven Spielberg or whoever wrote the screenplay started the process, they didn't take the 3-act structure and followed it. They just followed characters and inventions, and then they used the 3-act structure to check the tension in the screenplay, but they didn't use it from the very beginning. I'm sure that an experienced playwright doesn't do that.
It's a good speculation, Jean-Maria. No, I agree, and I think that's why I repeat what I said very much earlier, that this is not opposed to drama. It's in dialogue with drama. It enjoys the drama. It goes beside the drama. It can be surrounded by it or broken up by it. But what it is, it's polyvocal and hybrid in its form. It's combining different things, and in that way it reflects a more complex understanding of how cause and effects work in a process orient. It has that potential. That's what I like about it. So it isn't saying that you should do it like this or you should do it like this, but it's saying if you do like in this way and this way, this might happen if you put these kind of elements together. In that way, it is carnivalesque and open structured and full. And also some of the writers that Paul writes about, Hans Thies Lehmann writes about in his book about post-dramatic theatre. So they're not separate. They're still trying to find a way of understanding these new phenomena in theatre. Anybody else?
You really shouldn't kind of oppress stupid questions.
Please don't.
We love stupid questions. Yes.
I'm so fortunate to be in your workshop, and I really, really enjoy the process we're in. And I'm just curious to ask you, have you ever entered a production without a theme, without a will to do a certain story, but just be totally open, like we were yesterday, and you have a premiere date, an opening night, which is maybe 2 months ahead, and you have absolutely no idea, just clean your head, and you give it to the actors or the setting or whatever to be in your space and say, okay, let's see, what can we channel?
Because it might, when I talk, language is such a treacherous thing. When I talk, it might sound like I've thought out this theme, but actually, what starts it is that I'm producing some kind of text. For instance, when I wrote my play Suara, it started up with this girl who was watching. She's a security guard at the hotel, and she's watching all these movie screens, all these film screens. Filming, the lobby, the kitchen, the hallways, and it can reach everywhere. She can watch the people going into the elevator. There's this Latin or Russian-looking guy with a small, frail-boned 16-year-old Asian girl entering the elevator, and she starts following them through the cameras. But she cannot enter the room where they're going to sleep. And then she starts thinking, shit, what happens behind that closed wall, where the camera does not reach? And she says, that's when I start having these thoughts, these not so healthy thoughts about what goes on with the guests in the room when I cannot see them. And I did not know when I wrote that was the play. but that became the play. But what I do now is I try to scan my choices when that text appears. Not necessarily to stop the process, but actually to stimulate it. This is not some kind of, I'm not like a security guard or a prison guard of my text. I do let it go. But I try to understand why it goes the way it goes and push myself to be braver. Do not go for the obvious choices. Try to look for the polyvocality in myself. Is that a good place to end? Or
yeah, I think so. Because we're going to have a short break, but you're going to still be here with Gianluca and Paul and continue the conversation. But we're going to have like 10 minutes break. Thank you very much, Thaler.
Thank you.